Let's take a look now at how the markets are performing on this Monday. The local currency has retraced and is now rallying against the greenback ahead of the medium-term budget policy statement this week. International focus will be on the U.S. producer and the consumer inflation data for October. But for a look at these, as well as other business-related stories, we're joined now by Petri Redelinghuys, trader and founder of Herenya Capital Advisors. Good to have you with us this Monday afternoon, Mr. Redelinghuys. Now, the local currency looks to be retracing and rallying against the greenback ahead of the medium-term budget. What is driving those moves?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I think that, looking at the rand, I think it's more really a story of emerging market currencies relative to developed market currencies, or particularly relative to the US dollar. We've seen the US dollar continuing to strengthen over the last, I guess it's been about 6 months now, and it is likely to continue on that trend for continued dollar strength. I think what's busy happening really is we're starting to see a lot of evidence that the US markets and developed economies are recovering very strongly. And also we're seeing some quantitative tightening coming from their side. So we're, anticipating some, a tapering of the quantitative easing program that they've had, and eventual interest rate hikes pricing in around 25 basis point interest rate hikes next year in 2022. And that, I think, is attracting cash back into the US and strengthening up the dollar as investors are, avoiding the higher risk economies, if you will. And really sort of reinvesting their cash into the stronger economies. Now, there's a lot to be said for our market being undervalued and being relatively attractive, but that's relatively more attractive than other emerging markets compared to U.S. markets. I think that's where most investors are flooding, particularly seeking inflation protection, so going into TIPS and inflation-linked of stuff, and that is drawing a lot of cash into the U.S., strengthening the dollar and putting emerging market currencies under pressure. So I don't think it's as much, the move that we've been seeing over the last while has got less to do with us and more, I think, to do with the sort of global macro picture. Expectation for the rand at this stage is to sort of keep trading between this 15.50 or 15.30 to 14.15 level. So that's quite a big range, from 14 rand 15 all the way up to 15 rand 50. But I suspect it's going to continue to trade in that range over the next coming months. Unless we see, a major move from the dollar index, I don't think we'll break that range for some time.
Now, the medium-term budget policy statement and the new Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana's maiden budget delivery will undoubtedly dominate economic news this week. What should he be prioritizing at this time?
Sure. I'm not really too sure how to answer this. We have a lot of different challenges, that are faced, or that our economy faces. What the one thing is that it should be focusing on, I'm not really sure. We need to ensure that we get debt under control, government spending under control. But I don't know. I'm more concerned around what signals are we going to get around tax? Is there going to be any sort of communication coming through that we're going to increase tax rates or anything like that? I think that is potentially the biggest scare. But I don't really know. I tell you, I've got a wish list of things I'd love for them to spend money on, schools being one, but I guess, I'm not the finance minister, so we'll have to wait and see what he comes up with.
And it really is a wait and see until Thursday. But let's move on now to Omnia Holdings. They've released a trading statement for the 6 months ended 30th of September 2021. Talk us through their numbers.
So Omnia actually has recovered relatively well. Obviously, they're in the chemicals and explosive business. And I think what we've seen is, and this is a song that we've been singing for a long time, right? So 2019, 2020 was two, I suppose, of the wilder years in the history of at least our lifetimes. And a lot of companies have come under quite a bit of pressure during that time. So to see these companies starting to pull through earnings now, is that recovery trade, right? So if you look sort of at the headline numbers here, headline earnings per share are expected to be between 95 and 115% higher compared to the previous reporting period. So that seems really fantastic, right? But again, keep in mind that there was almost zero not almost zero, but very little economic activity in the previous period that we're comparing to. So It looks really, really good. However, we need to see how this goes forward. I think we need to really do another year of reporting before we really see. You kind of want to erase that 2020 year, if you will, right? What is interesting though is if you only look at the continuing operations, because they've obviously sold down some assets that haven't been doing so well, then headline earnings per share sort of increases actually to between, I think it's 105 and 116%. So it's looking like the company is starting to, I guess, come out of the other end of the woodwork. There is some hyperinflation in their earnings as well, so they unfortunately book a bit of a loss in Zimbabwe. Not too big though, but obviously the Zimbabwean economy under a bit of pressure and a bit of a hyperinflation happening there. It is actually looking pretty interesting from an investment perspective as well. I mean, if you consider that in 2014, we were trading at about 240 Rand a share. We're now all the way down to 64 Rand. I think on the back of decent results, if we can continue to see, growing earnings from the base that we've had now, it might make a bit of a compelling long-term investment here.
Well, let's take a look at Robux for a moment. They also released their interim results for the 6 months ended 31st of August 2021 and a dividend declaration. How have they fared?
Robux has done relatively well. I guess what's interesting here is that, this is also another thing that's evident in the recovery and potentially a setup for sort of medium-term economic growth from here, is something that we're starting to see in the construction companies is that the order books are growing, right? So they had an order book in the first half of 2021 of 11.7 billion. Currently, first half of this current quarter that we're reporting on now, half that we're reporting on now, the order book is up to 16.5 billion rand, obviously. So that's really, really good. There's a nice sort of deal flow coming through, or a nice order book of stuff that's going to keep them busy for some time. They've done relatively well on the Beitbridge border post as well. That's achieved some milestones. So it seems as though there's quite a bit of activity picking up in this sector. I think potentially this is something that we might see coming out of the budget speech today, is that if government is putting a bit more of a keen focus on infrastructure development and that type of thing, someone like Robux is well positioned to take advantage of that. So this recovery is really coming well. Also, we can also look at something like what is a bit concerning is the amount of gearing that Robux has, but when the times are good, the gearing helps. Revenue increased something like 52% during the reporting period. However, operating profit increased 1,900%, right? As where earnings per share increased 658%. So that's quite a bit of gearing on the balance sheet. But if we do see continued order book growth and we see some more tenders coming their way, they should do relatively well going forward. I think this is also quite encouraging for other construction companies, particularly Aveng. I know Aveng is one of those companies that people are very excited about. It's 6 cents a share at the moment. So hopefully Robux's results is indicative of what is to come for the entire sector.
And I must say, Petri, this is probably the type of news that a lot of companies are anticipating now, especially after the lockdown periods and the downturn in productivity within the various sectors. But thank you very much for today's market update. That's Petri Redelinghuys from Herenya Capital. Thank you. He brought us today's market update.